please turn away here from here. You're an image bearer of God. You're beautifully and wonderfully made.
Is that enough? Have you had enough? Is that enough of feeling really self-righteous this morning?
It's 2022, and the disgusting antics of anti-abortion radicals are still making headlines every day. But activists aren't standing for it. They're making sure the world sees just how crazy the anti-abortion right really is.
Man,
they don't want to talk to you.
Man, your child is supposed to be loved for and cared for.
They don't want to talk to you. I already helped them.
Please don't go in there, Mama.
Bro, leave them alone.
You're a mother today or tomorrow.
Dude, leave them alone.
Whether you feel like you're going to be loved for or cared for.
They don't want to talk to you.
Your child is loved and cared for.
They don't want to talk to you, dude.
Your child is providing for you to be
Give it up,
sustained
dude. Come
for.
on. Come on, dude. You're being
Please
creepy.
don't go in there and kill your child.
Dude, come on now.
What does God think of that?
What is wrong with you, dude? Come on.
Would you consider yourself Christian?
Cut it out.
Across the country, TikTok users like the Clinic Defender are using their platforms to poke holes in the right's Christian totalitarianism, including attempts to intimidate or threaten women on the toughest day of their lives. And they're finding support from an unlikely place: former anti-abortion activists who now regret their actions.
Okay, kids, that wraps up our lesson on Adam and Eve. Any questions?
Was the talking snake real?
Yes, the talking snake was real because we believe the Bible is God's literal words. We take it literally.
What about Jubilee and Deuteronomy?
Oh, how do you know about that?
It's said to cancel and forgive debts every 7 years.
So we don't take everything literal. So that's talking about spiritual, metaphorical debts, okay? Like, we don't just forgive financial debts.
Wouldn't Jesus want us to love and care for our neighbor?
Yes, Jesus does ask us to care for those and to love our neighbor, but Jesus can't make me, right? Like the government, you can't make me care for people. That's the difference.
That was April LaJoy, an ex-conservative and host of the Evangelicalish podcast. She's made headlines for rejecting exactly the kind of extremism we just saw. April's TikToks break down the evangelical movement and provide insights into what makes the far right so deeply anti-choice. LaJoy and the abortion clinic escorts we saw earlier are flipping the script on religious extremists by using social media to undercut their message. That's because these activists understand that the best way to neutralize the movement is to let them speak for themselves. As it turns out, the far right is excellent at turning people against their cause, and April isn't alone.
Evangelical Christian groups have rallied to limit access to abortion for years, but it wasn't always a political issue for them. Enter Francis Schaeffer, an evangelical scholar whose son Frank encouraged him to campaign against Roe v. Wade with Christian literature and movies that they were producing. It is an extraordinary story, for without the Schaeffers, this culture war might not have been so fired up.
Any student of the Christian right knows Frank Schaeffer. He was the brains behind propaganda videos that helped launch the modern Christian right. He was known as one of America's most aggressive anti-abortion crusaders. Now Schaeffer is making headlines after apologizing for his involvement in what he calls the right's anti-family movement. And while it can be hard to forgive Schaeffer for the generations of Americans that he traumatized, he's certainly serious about making amends. Schaeffer has spent years pushing back against politicized religion, and nobody knows the inner workings of the Christian right as well as Schaeffer, who literally wrote the book on how to radicalize the issue of abortion.
I'm correct in assuming, because we stated it, that you are now very regretful of your role in this movement.
Yes, it's like hearing about someone else's life conducted on a different planet. You know, I did the work with my father and the pro-life movement in the 1970s. I'm now pushing 70 years old. This is 50 years ago. And as I look back, I can only say that not only do I regret the impact we had, of course, it was completely unforeseen.
Schaeffer describes a movement where nepotism and close political connections did the driving, while actual faith took a back seat. He also highlights one of the biggest truths the Christian right doesn't want to admit: that Reverend Billy Graham, one of America's most influential evangelical pastors of all time, was unashamedly pro-choice, and Graham wanted nothing to do with what the Republican religious right was selling. The far right's political Christianity became so twisted, Schaeffer says, that it actually led to evangelicals campaigning against Jimmy Carter, America's first evangelical president. And as Schaeffer tells us, it wasn't about Carter's faith. It was about political deals that leaders like Jerry Falwell were cutting with then-candidate Ronald Reagan. Take a listen.
Jimmy Carter was too decent a human being. He was compassionate to women. He was pro-choice. He was not a racist. He believed in integration. He wanted to increase voter rights for African Americans. Jerry Falwell was a segregationist. He was a far-right winger. He was a homophobe and a nasty piece of work. It's as simple as that. And basically, Jerry Falwell and these other guys could not manipulate Jimmy Carter. He was an evangelical Christian and a Bible teacher, literally, in Sunday school, but he was, in their view, the wrong kind of Christian because they had already so politicized their vision of the gospel that they were far more interested in the politics than they were in, if you want to put it in evangelical terms, sharing the love of Jesus.
If all this sounds familiar, it's because the evangelical right made the same dirty deal with Donald Trump, sacrificing what little Christianity they had left in order to grow their political power. That's the movement Schaefer, April LaJoy, and others are trying to stop. But in the era of a Trumpified Supreme Court, the religious right is racking up more wins than ever, including on abortion. But unlike in the 80s, the right also faces an America where pro-choice advocates are more organized and more vocal than ever. And they have the power of the internet to amplify just how crazy these far-right fanatics are. That might not seem like much, given the federal government's foot-dragging around abortion, but documenting the extremism consuming our country is a job of critical importance. Without these videos to challenge the far-right propaganda narrative, many of these painful interactions might be written off as lies, or at best, isolated incidents. Now, we know better. And it's causing even formerly anti-abortion conservatives to re-examine their core values. To bring in real change, those same conservatives will need to bring that outrage to the ballot box in November. If you made it to the end, thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like and consider subscribing. And leave a comment below so you can tell me what I should cover next.